So Tim, we wanted to have a conversation about race with everything going on in the world. So let's just start off by saying, when did you have the conversation with your kids and when did your parents have the conversation with you?
Well, let's start with my family. So I was a young kid, probably 6, 7 years old. I was going from my neighborhood, which is predominantly African American, to a school that was predominantly white, and they wanted me to do my best. They wanted me to be representative of my family and our culture. And then shortly thereafter, we started talking about police and how to act around police.
What age was that?
That was probably 8 years old. It was probably the first time I remember having a conversation. They wanted me just to know to be respectful because I had to ride the bus a long way. So I was on the street waiting on the bus and that kind of thing. So they wanted me to be prepared if something happened.
So that's the Southern way. So were you saying yes, ma'am, yes, sir?
Of course, yeah.
Southern hospitality?
That is Southern hospitality. That's part of the culture down here.
So you said 8 years old. What about your kids? When did you have that conversation?
They were probably a little bit older. My oldest son was probably 10, and the other two were 7 and 6 or 7 and 5. So he was a little bit older, but they were a little bit younger, and we talked about police and what to do in that situation. And we've watched movies, and some things happen, and we'll take a stop and say, okay, kids, if this happens, this is what you need to do. Be very respectful. Keep 2 hands on the wheel if you're driving. If someone approaches you, yes, ma'am, yes, sir. Make sure you look them in the eye and conform to what they're saying.
So let's fast forward and we'll go kind of back and forth. So
Yeah.
you decided to come out in April, roughly, with a statement right after the George Floyd murder happened.
Right.
That was enough is enough in itself.
Yeah.
Why did you decide that was the point of I need to say something just to not normalize it anymore?
Yeah, I think the thing is I wanted to be able to use my voice. People put out statements, and a lot of times when those statements come out, they're generic, and I didn't want that. I wanted something that was meaningful, heartfelt. I knew student athletes follow me, and I'm representative of them and this institution. So I wanted to make sure that I said something that was thoughtful, and I took my time. I didn't want to be the first one out there. And hopefully it played well for them. Hopefully they understood, my point.
So the social media side, I don't think a lot of people, they just assume you just went out and put it out. There was thought behind it. I remember this was around Friday, a week after or so it happened.
Right.
You called me and said, hey, this is what happened. This is why I wanted to say something. What do you think about this? What scenarios were you going by in your head and why?
Just what to say. I didn't know how personal I wanted to get. As you know, I'm pretty transparent with our staff and with student athletes anyway in meetings. But to be that vulnerable, I think has to come from a place that I just wanted to make sure that was the type of content that I wanted to put out there. So, I wanted to just kind of think through, was I ready to say something like that? And, what was the impact was going to be? And I was strictly thinking about student athletes. I didn't think that it would, go from anywhere from there.
And right after your statement, you met with the student athletes and said, we'll encourage you in whichever decision you want to take. If you want to say something, if you don't, everyone kind of took that on. Some people said something, some people kept that internally. But a lot of student athletes decided, I want to say something. Was that type of the impact that you thought your video was going to have that was going to allow them to have that voice?
Well, I hope so. I didn't know. But after having a conversation with Dr. Nick Lowe, he embraced it. I wanted to run it by him, of course. He embraced our student athletes and their voice. As you know, he's a former student athlete. He's really supportive of them and their voice. And that's the right thing to do. So I wanted to make sure that we provided them with the opportunity, that we weren't going to try to hold them back from speaking their piece.
Right.
But I wanted to also let them know that there may be some people who don't like that. So there may be some ramifications that don't come from us, but may come from out in the public that they have to be aware of. Just because they're speaking their piece and they think it's their personal social media, there's no personal social media. It'll go out there and people can post negative comments, and I wanted them to be ready for that as well.
How'd your family react when your statement came out?
I think they were proud. They know that, things kind of roll off of me pretty easily. So to see me in a kind of reflective light, I think kind of touched them because I usually don't let things bother me. And unfortunately, that didn't bother me until much later after I had a chance to think about it. But I think they were, proud that I wanted to create something for others to benefit from.
Right. So now, again, we're kind of going to go back and forth. So we're doing this interview in full disclosure days after the Jacob Blake situation happened. And so you see that happen. What is your immediate thinking when something like that happens?
Here we go again. That It doesn't matter what his criminal past was. It doesn't matter if they say he was reaching for a knife. There were multiple guys, and they shot him, 7 times in the back. And I've seen other videos. It was one video that came out a few days later with a white gentleman who literally told the policeman he would kill him. And I don't want him to die either, but it's just a stark contrast on how black men or African American men are treated versus the general public. So it's just frustrating that these things continue to happen. I was happy and proud to see the young men in the NBA, the MLS, Major League Baseball, and the NFL, and college campuses around the country, utilize their voice to take a pause to just shine some light on it, because it's happened too much, and it doesn't make a difference, in my opinion, when you have the advantage in numbers, why you still have to shoot someone. It doesn't, and they didn't know his criminal record at the time. To them, he was just a black man who didn't do what they said. And we can't have that kind of action from police. As Chris Rock, one of my favorite comedians, say, there can't be any bad apples. Policemen cannot have bad apples. Pilots can't have bad apples,
right.
Yeah. And because lives are affected. I feel like we can't have bad apples in athletics because we're shaping young minds. So it is important for them to be the right type of people. And hopefully we can get there.
So you mentioned not having bad apples. When did you realize that you had to walk a different line than, say, somebody else that looks different than you?
Early, 6, 7 years old, when I went to elementary school for the first time. It was a very diverse school, had a great education. 2 of my best friends, one of my best friends was an African American male, one was an Asian male, and one was a Hispanic male. They were my best friends from first through like the 4th or 5th grade. And we all knew we were different. My parents wanted to make sure that I knew that I had to compete at a high level, not athletically, they had nothing to do with it, but academically. So that was really important for us, and they instilled in me that I can do whatever I wanted to do in this world if I worked hard and I was respectful and I tried to make great choices. And I knew that, and they told me that sometimes you'll be judged differently by the color of your skin. And I had great experiences growing up and at the school, but still, you just know when you're in the store and a security guard or a store manager follows you when they don't follow anyone else, or you're walking down the street and someone locks their door as you walk by. Right. It's just that's just a different reaction that unfortunately many of us have to grown accustomed to.
I think it's unique in itself because where you were going, you mentioned this in the video, you were going to Whole Foods.
Right.
So it wasn't like you were trying to just like aimlessly walk around. You were just getting something to eat.
Right.
And I remember when that video came out, my wife, who's white, my wife saw it, and for me it was more so a learning experience of I can't expect you to understand what's going on if I don't explain to you.
Right.
Just coming from me, and again, I grew up from New York City, so it's a diverse background.
Right.
That's where I grew up around, but it was different for me. And so when she saw that come from somebody else, it's almost like a student athlete feels empowered to say something because they see, hey, I have this job. I'm not necessarily not worried about the job, but I need to say something to impact you, to empower you to say something. And I think that's impactful for all of our student athletes.
Yeah, I hope so, man. And it helps to have a leader, again, who allows you to do that. I probably would have made a statement anyway, but I'm happy that he embraced it and encouraged me to do it. It just makes you feel that weight off, so there's not a lot of pressure when it comes to it. So. Yeah, as you mentioned, I was walking to Whole Foods, and Whole Foods are typically in great neighborhoods.
Right. And
Newton, Mass is a wonderful neighborhood, great education, tremendous neighbors, and it can happen to me there. That means it can literally happen to a black man anywhere.
Now, what was the reaction from them? I obviously know, but why don't you just explain what the reaction was?
Oh man, the reaction has been overwhelming. From the mayor to the police chief, they have a civil rights officer within the police force, which was the first time I ever heard anything. The attorney general from the state of Massachusetts called me. Many reporters from Massachusetts, from Memphis, where I'm from North Carolina, where I used to live, here. It was overwhelming. So the amount of calls that next week was just draining. It really was. Telling that story over and over. But it was designed to help people. And the police chief in Newton ended up resigning, and they hired someone else that hopefully will do a great job and try to ensure civil rights aren't violated when it comes to, suspects.
So moving around as much as we do in college athletics,
right.
Do you consistently have that conversation with your kids, especially you having a son that's college age?
Yeah, absolutely. You have to remind them all the time. And there's there are reminders every day on the news, unfortunately. But yeah, I remind them all the time, what the expectation is for them. And I have high expectations for them, and that is to be respectful. One of that's to be respectful to any adult, but absolutely to law enforcement.
So what's the contrast like now in New Orleans? New Orleans is very diverse,
Right.
but our university is an urban institution,
Yeah.
and it seems very diverse, but it seems like it's a little bit more diverse in terms of the thought process. It's not
Right.
as, for lack of a better term, racist as some other
Yeah.
cities or countries, for
Yeah.
that matter.
I think I've lived in majority cities before, like the city of New Orleans. Memphis is one, Atlanta is another one in here. So I've lived in a place that is a lot more diverse than some places, than Boston or Newton, where I lived most recently. So I'm comfortable in those environments, kind of moving. I'm comfortable in any environment, and I think on our campus, we're doing the best job we can to have our population reflect our city and our country. And I'm comfortable with that. Dr. Nick Lowe and Mary Beth and enrollment management are doing a great job of recruiting student athletes from all over to make this a well-rounded, diverse institution. And I'm happy to represent our student athlete population from many, many states and multiple countries around the world.
Now, you mentioned Privateers for Equality for the TV show,
Right.
and you mentioned Black AD Alliance in the press release. Why do you feel like that's something that can benefit all 185 student athletes, not just specifically one race?
Yeah, no, great question, man. I think, so first of all, with the Privateers for Equality, it's about education. We're educators at the end of the day. So we have to make sure that we're teaching all of our students that equality is what, minorities and women should shoot for. It shouldn't be, diversity, inclusion, equity are all great things, but equality, we want those same things. I read recently that most white males in college, I think 95% was the number, have never received any diversity training.
Right.
And then those are a lot of the leaders in our country, and that's fine. But they get into these spaces and not necessarily know how to react or to lead a diverse population. So I think that's a part of what we do as student athletes in athletics sometimes better than others, because in the team setting, you interact with so many different people. So I know our university has just created a Justice PhD, and we're incorporating some diversity, equity, inclusion, social justice training in our UNIV classes for athletics and for the university. So we're starting to try to rectify that problem from a grassroots level. And then from the Black AD Alliance, we're all Black ADs, but we serve all of our student athletes, which is a beautiful thing. And that was something that we specifically spoke about, that we're not Black ADs only serving Black student athletes, that we serve a diverse population, and we want to be great leaders, and we want them to see what leadership from a Black man or a Black woman looks like, because they may never have had a Black coach or a Black Cub Scout leader or a minister or even a teacher. So if they have a chance to, I want to make sure that I'm as tight as I can be with my professionalism, with my education, with my experience, so they can gain and understand that there can be successful Black leaders here that I can learn from. And then they, in turn, when they go out, they give hopefully the benefit of the doubt to other Black leaders.
So when you see the numbers, the percentages that came out from the NCAA that we were talking about, I think it was a few months ago now, and you see the numbers and they're slowly declining
Right.
in minorities, and the majority of senior level administrators are white. You have an institution here where 4 of the 5 of your executive team are minorities.
Right.
What does that mean to you? And is that something that you value, and not necessarily put that as a priority, but is that something you value? We need to embody this city.
Yeah, I think it's important that your leadership reflects the people they lead. I think that's very important. So I think we do that in a great way. And I think what we've done here is we look harder, we search harder for the right talent. And if you have a more inclusive pool, you'll have a better chance to have some, more women and minorities. So, 40% of our leadership team is women. There are 3 African Americans, 1 Hispanic, 1 white male. And we mesh very well. Our strengths complement each other. If someone's weak in one area, another person is strong, and that's what leadership is about. And the key part is just having inclusive search pools. Because if you always go to the same search pool or people, you'll always get the same thing. And I think our student athletes deserve to have the very best talent. And if you increase that net, then you'll have a better shot of getting that.
I think one of the things that I want people to know is when you and I first spoke, before you even got here, you mentioned to me, we mentioned about some of the positions that need to be hired, and Shane's was the first one, I believe.
Absolutely.
And you said, let's promote in MOA, let's promote everywhere. It wasn't just, hey, let's promote on CoStar's website or the NCAA website.
Right.
It was, let's go through all these websites
Right.
and let's just find the best candidate.
Right.
So that way, it's not necessarily guaranteeing one race or another race, but now you have a more inclusive
Right.
output. And is that something that you feel like needs to happen with every job here?
Absolutely, absolutely. And Shane is a white male. He's the best guy for the job, and we're happy to have him. We stole him, as I like to say, from the Saints and Pelicans, and he's the best guy for this job. But we wanted to make it competitive. We don't want to just do searches where we just know the candidate and bring them in with no competition. That's not the best thing for our student athletes. So yeah, we want to have very inclusive searches to include MOA and women leaders and the D1 ticker and college AD and every other diverse publication that we can get the best talent we can. And sometimes it'll look like me, and sometimes it'll look like you, and sometimes it'll look like Shane or Matt or Dina or Kirsten or Renee or whomever. I think that's important.
So going back to a conversation that you and I had, you mentioned one of the times that you were pulled over. What is that process like with your family? Because your wife was with you.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people harped on your experience,
Yeah.
but not many people spoke about your wife. So
Right.
she doesn't have the same platform as
Right,
you
right.
in terms of being a public person. So how did she
Yeah.
react to that? And how do your kids react to something like that?
Yeah.
Because it's going to affect your wife
Yeah.
when she sees guns drawn on you.
Right. I mean, she was nervous, obviously. She bounced back pretty well, man. I mean, we're resilient. I think, I don't know, it's, the way she was raised, she has a military father, so she's pretty, she's strong mentally. She didn't let it, outwardly bother her. I know she was nervous after the fact.
Right.
But she was extremely calm. She was, worried. It makes her worry more about our sons after having experienced something like that.
What about knowing that you were here by yourself for a year? Seeing something like that, I mean, I'm sure she would have. What if that happened when she wasn't around and you never said anything? 'Cause you were worried?
Yeah. I think that would worry her to death. So I'm glad she hadn't brought that up, at least to me. I'm sure she's thought about it.
I'm sorry.
But yeah, I know. Here we go. But no, it's. I think that she would worry about it. I'm glad that we're back as a family unit, and that's one of the unintended benefits of COVID, that they were able to come here in March when everything shut down. So while this horrible virus is, negatively affecting and killing many, many people, one of the bright spots, at least for our family, is that we got our unit back together. We wouldn't have gotten together until June, but we were able to get together in March and be a unit down here, and basically had each other because we couldn't go anywhere or do anything. So it was almost a great reunion after 8-9 months of being apart, that we can able to get back together.
So how does she react when she sees guns drawn on you?
Yeah.
The immediate reaction is to get defensive.
Right.
But obviously you can't do that in that type of
Right.
situation. So how did she react to that?
She was really calm. She didn't say a word. She was stood by my side the entire time. But she was there. She has a quiet strength that I appreciate and that I can glean from. So she was there. She was quiet. She was right beside me. She's not one of those type of people who will be verbally abusive to anyone at any time anyway. But she was there, and her being there, I think, helped make me calm, because I knew that I didn't want to do anything to negatively affect her. Now, whether that was happening to me or whether it happened to her, I didn't want, her to be a part of that.
What was the conversation like going back home after that?
Yeah, we actually said that we thought that, because we were walking down the street, we didn't have our masks on. And Newton is one of those small towns that we actually said, well, I thought they were pulling up on us because we didn't have our mask on, until the guy got out with the gun. And my wife is really inquisitive, so she wanted to know, who were they looking for? Where actually did they live? What did the person look like? To see if they actually looked like me. So she, started diving into the questions that, that's her way as an accountant. She wants to dig to the bottom of stuff. So that was her reaction, to kind of give her a sense of control, to start asking these questions and try to figure out, basically how that case of mistaken identity happened.
So you mentioned the mistaken identity. We saw the photo.
Yeah.
How did she react when she saw that photo?
We don't think that it looks like me. And tall is relative. I think the person was 6'3", which is tall to some people, but I'm 6'8", so that's not really tall to me. It's tall to you. So the description of a tall black man shouldn't, warrant guns.
Right.
It shouldn't. I think there are other ways they could have handled it. She was a little frustrated after she saw it because,
And rightfully so.
And rightfully so, because it looked nothing like me. But when your description is a tall black man, that's pretty generic.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, I went to school, I went to 89% white school.
Yeah.
And so for me, and just being around that for almost the first time I got pulled over, and my roommates, I had 5 white roommates. The first time I get pulled over, I had guns drawn. They were like, well, what the hell happened? I was like, well, you guys don't know about that stuff.
Right.
And so for me, it was more so a conversation I need to have with not just them, but ultimately, I didn't know my wife back then.
Right.
The first time she was in the car and she sees that, she's like, well, shit, what happened?
What's going on? Yeah.
So I told her that's something that we have to explain. So how do you take that with your kids who may not have experienced that, but know that that's something that they may experience, unfortunately, down the line? How do you take your experience and say, hey, you have to stay calm? I know that's something you never want to go through.
Right.
But as an 18 to 22-year-old, if you do get pulled over sometime, that's the first reaction.
Yeah, we just kind of do practice drills, man. I've done it with Tyson. He's my college-age son. We've done that before. He's in Georgia right now. He doesn't have a car, but he could still get stopped at any moment. We just rehearse. Just, tell me what you would say, and, let's talk through it. And I mean, it's like practice like anything else. Once you practice a few times, you'll be ready for the spiel, and what how your body should look and how you react in those situations.
Right.
And that, unfortunately, that still doesn't guarantee that you won't be, shot or, abused, unfortunately. But I just want him to concentrate on what he can control.
So one thing with the diversity and equity plan that we were talking about in the past, and I know you mentioned this, so we won't go into too much detail, but you mentioned it being inclusive to all races, all sexes, LGBTQ community.
Right.
It's everybody that's inclusive. So when you have these conversations, do you think that that's something that we're going to roll in different backgrounds just so we can be more inclusive, more selective with that?
I think it's just a matter. It just depends on who the candidates are.
Right.
And I think the number one thing is not to disqualify anyone who is different than what we are. That's the minimum that we should do. And then we should strongly pursue people who would complement our department. New Orleans has a large LGBTQ community. If that's something that our community has, and that's something that our student athletes have, then we should make sure that we're inclusive enough. If that is, if someone comes here and receives a job, that they feel comfortable in our midst. And we are comfortable with them, obviously we will be, and they're comfortable being here, that we are treating them as an equal.
So with having that position, do you see them almost being as, not necessarily a mentor, but if you have a student athlete that's coming from that similar background and that similar thought process, they have somebody to go to?
Yeah, I think it has to be a personal choice by the person in that role. Everyone's not meant to mentor in that season or time. People have different time when they take more of that role in, but I think just by witnessing, someone being successful in whatever, whether it's a black male or white female or, someone who is LGBTQ, I think that in and of itself will provide someone who identifies with that with an opportunity. Wow, I hadn't seen that, before in this space. I can do that, and I think that's important.
So looking at the protests that go on, and you see, obviously it depends on what you watch.
Right.
You see either, you can use the words looting, you see why are they doing that, Antifa, you see all these things.
Right.
You mentioned to the student athletes, we will support you in any which way, just be careful with what you do.
Right.
Why is it important to let them know there are consequences to every action, and we'll support you either which way, but you should know that somebody may not agree with your decision.
Right, absolutely. I think it's smart. I think our job as educators are to make sure that they understand their choices. And sometimes the ramifications or ramifications of their choices spin out of their control. So when we told them that they feel free to go and protest if that is what they want to do, we wanted to make sure that we educated them. It's best to do that in the daytime. At nighttime is usually when these protests are co-opted by people who come for other reasons. And those people can be black, white, or whatever, but they come to co-op and start trouble. So if they want to protest, they should consider doing it in the daytime, because when nighttime comes, it may spin out of control. It could turn into a stampede situation or something very violent, or you get sprayed with mace by the law enforcement. So I wanted to just make sure that they understood that we support their inalienable and fundamental right to protest. That's what our country was built on. But they should be smart about it and just think about what they've seen and when it happens, and hopefully they can try to avoid those situations. Make sure they stay with friends, they know where the car is to go, and when it gets dark, hopefully they'll get out of there.
How do you think we move forward from here?
You know, I used to think that, well, I still think that having these conversations help, and they do, but I think we have to become more active anti-racists. Racism is a passive word, and sometimes people think, oh, I like black people, or I have a friend with a black person, or I'm friends with a white person, that means you're not racist. But a definition that I've heard recently is that you should be actively trying to promote equality. So it puts the onus on you for action. And I think being an anti-racist is something that you work against racism, whether it's systematically or whether it's, the overt kind. And I think that's what I would like for people to start doing. And I think we have to change what the general definition of racism is, because it's way too passive. I can like you and still be a racist.
Right.
It doesn't mean that I'm not. So I think if you are an anti-racist and you're actively trying to work against what is an oppressive system, whether that's by law enforcement, or whether it's redlining by banks, or whether it's, poor funding for schools in minority neighborhoods, working against that shows that you're trying to make the system better.
Is it fair to say just ask questions, even if they're uncomfortable?
Yeah, I think this is a difficult conversation for many white people to have, because sometimes you have to face some things that happened in the past that you're not responsible for.
Right.
But you bear the onus of that. So I think we need to create a safe space for them to be able to ask those questions. And I think that they have to, listen to our perspective, and you may not understand the perspective, but just respect it. And I think that'll go a long way as a start. And I think that's the start.
It's hard to understand somebody if you're not willing to talk about it.
Right.
So asking those questions, whether uncomfortable or not, do you feel like that's a better way, number one, to get to know you and where your philosophy comes from, but number two, to kind of understand the grasp of this person looks different, this is why they navigate the world differently?
I think what I do, man, I try to put myself in other people's shoes, and I probably do that a lot, way too much. My brain is so overloaded by thinking about what does it look like from this perspective. But I think that's been healthy for me, to have a true respect of what other people think. I want to know what they're thinking. So when I write an email, I think about it, how is this going to be received by student athletes? How is this going to be received by our staff? I don't get it right all the time, but I definitely take the time to think about how that's going to be received. And I think when we have these conversations, I think about, how our messages are leaving my mouth and how you may interpret it. And I want to make sure I get it right. And I think that's important. And I think it's important for when we're discussing race that people give the benefit of the doubt to people, to hear them out and hear their perspective either way.
So that same appreciation, or almost give them the thought process, is that something that you feel needs to happen in law enforcement as well, to where if you get pulled over, it's not automatically presumed guilty?
Yeah, and law enforcement have a tough job. My wife's two favorite uncles are both retired law enforcement. Rondino here on campus is, a great friend to our department. So they have a tough job, I get it. And when you're around criminals or pursuing criminals all the time, you're gonna rather be safe than sorry. Absolutely, no doubt about it. However, I think excessive violence and excessive force, there's no place for that. And that's just what I feel. So I just think that I would love for them to just think about that, take a moment. And, it's a tough job, man. I wouldn't want to do it, but I think that's the price to pay to take a job like that, is to make sure that you're serving the citizens. And, black men and black women are citizens too, that sometimes don't receive that same treatment that, for example, the gentleman who told the policeman that he would kill them.
Especially when you have to make split-second decisions.
Right. I get it. It's tough because it's life or death, and they're putting their lives on the line for us. However, as we've seen many times, those life or death situations are only for the people who they're supposed to be serving, and not for the officers themselves.
Yeah, it's a unique situation because, I have a Hispanic family, and we have law enforcement, we have immigration lawyers, we have criminal lawyers, we have criminal defense lawyers. So you have the arguments on both sides. So It's almost like they understand each other.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying by any means my family should be the example, but you almost have those conversations to where now people are understanding. You may not agree with it,
right,
but at least you're having that conversation. And it's not had when a gun is drawn to your head or you're presumed guilty.
Right. And then when you have those type of conversations, we can't be arrogant enough that we're going to change someone's mind right then.
Right.
Hopefully most people will go away and continue to replay those conversations and may have a change in perspective a week from now, a month from now, a year from now. So we're planting seeds. Every time we have these conversations, we're planting seeds that hopefully will bloom in people's minds so they can understand and have a different perspective down the road.
When somebody looks at your department and the way that you run it, from the diversity, equity, and inclusion side, what do you want them to see?
That we look like our city, that we're treating people fairly, we give people the benefit of the doubt, we believe in equality amongst race, amongst gender, amongst sexual orientation. We just want to be fair. Not just fair, we want to promote equality. That's the most important thing.